Welcome back to Real Talk with Real People. My name is Dr. Caroline Bethea-Jones, and I am your host for this evening, and I have a special guest on the phone with me today. Her name is Miss Anita Russell. How are you doing today, Anita?
I'm very well, Caroline. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you. I know we've been trying to get this done for a while, and I'm so very happy that tonight is the night that we get to have a conversation.
Yes.
So how are you?
I am doing very well. Lots of different things that are going on in my life. All of them are very good things. Family is good. My practice is good.
Yes.
I'm going in the right direction.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm very pleased with the place that God has me in at this point in my life.
I am very pleased too. I'm gonna tell my audience just a little bit about you from your bio, okay? And then we can talk candidly after that. So, Anita is a John Maxwell Certified life coach, and she's going to tell us a little bit about that later, and what that actually means, okay? She's an international best-selling author with career experience in multiple disciplines, including pharmaceutical, learning and development, and leadership. She is an all-around jack of all trades here, aren't you? Okay, she is the founder and creator of The Place to SOAR, and that's a social enterprise dedicated to cultivating change through daily growth and personal development, and we like that. The SOAR concept, SOAR is an acronym for Step Out and Redesign, and it grew out of her decision to leave corporate America back in 2013. The Place to SOAR includes SOAR Coaching Academy, the SOAR Youth Empowerment Program, and the Place to SOAR TV. Wonderful. So Anita coaches women, and she coaches men, and she coaches them towards becoming the person they aspire to be by examining the person that they are and deciding how to move towards living their best life. And that is why you are here today, because you have inspired me, and I know that you're going to inspire my audience tonight. So, Anita, let's talk.
Yes. I know there's a lot of stuff packed in that bio, and one of the reasons I do that, kind of really, because I want to paint like a very broad picture of where I am and what it is I do in my life, not for my purpose, but to glorify God, because all of those things really grew out of the time when I just made that decision. And it wasn't even me that made the decision to leave corporate America. It was actually God moving me from one assignment to another assignment. And it was a little scary. And quite frankly, I was not completely prepared. But what I ended up doing was making a decision that God is moving me out. That means my safety net is gone. Everything about the way that I lived my life up until that point changed overnight. And I like to tell people that I left corporate America on a Friday. It was February the 1st, 2013. And I woke up on Monday and it was like, oh my gosh, what did you just do?
I know.
But at the same time, I was very sure, I was completely sure and completely had that trust that God intentionally moved me out. And so the beginning part of that was very shaky, and I thought when God moved me out of that position in that role that he was putting me in one direction. And I found out a little bit through trial and error, because you know how sometimes we got to figure God out, and sometimes we go in one direction when he really meant for us to go in a different direction. And so that's what happened to me. And what I did not realize is that God called me out of corporate America to be a life coach. I thought he called me out of corporate America to do some different things.
Okay.
There were some other things that I was involved in at that time. I was building a business in the travel space, and I thought he pulled me out for that purpose. But then I found out that wasn't what he pulled me out for. He pulled me out for the purpose of becoming a life coach.
Now, how long did it take you to realize that, though? How many years went by?
It took me a while. So I came out in 2013, and I took my first coaching certification program in 2014. I think it was very late 2014 going into 2015. And you want to know the crazy thing about that whole thing is that as I was beginning to understand that God was moving me out of my corporate job, I had worked with someone. I was sort of working in that learning and development space. And one of the external vendors that I worked with on a regular basis was actually an executive coach. And she used to tell me all the time, and we worked together quite a bit, and she used to tell me on multiple occasions, Anita, you're a life coach. Like, I'm looking at you and I'm watching how you do your work, how you interact with people, and all of that. You are, in fact, a life coach. So if you ever decide to leave this work, that's something that you should really consider. So these little seeds were kind of dropped along the way. However, at the time, I didn't really know what a life coach was. I saw myself as a learning and development professional. This life coach thing, I have no idea what that is. But she said it to me on multiple times. And then there were other things that were kind of cropping up that were like, you should, and finally I just said, you really should check out this life coach thing. So by that time, I was starting to do a little bit of exploration, a little bit of research to find out exactly what it was and what was it that she was seeing in me that made her believe that this was essentially my calling. And finally, I just decided to kind of go through a very immersive certification program, mainly for the purpose of seeing, is this really something that, number one, I can do, and number two, that I would enjoy doing it. So I found this program. It was a weekend, a very intense, immersive weekend from Friday to Monday, and I totally got it. After I took that program, I completely got where this woman was coming from when she kept telling me that I was a life coach. And so that started me in a completely different direction. I did that initial certification, and I was just ready to go at that point, but I still had a lot of learning to do, and I had to build I had to really sit down and think about, well, how am I going to build this business? I don't really know anything about building this because I thought I was going to be in the network marketing industry and, I had this travel business and blah, 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 blah. But that was just not coming together. I mean, it just was not coming together. And then I found myself on this. And as I was going through all of that, the whole concept of the place to soar started to develop within me. As a matter of fact, when I initially left my job, I had a retirement party, and my retirement party, the theme of that retirement party was my redesigned life. And in your reading the bio, you see that the SOAR, SOAR, is an acronym for Step Out and Redesign, because I felt like that was what I was doing. I am totally and completely redesigning my whole entire life. And so this concept of this SOAR thing just started growing. It started blossoming. And I got the TV show. And I got the TV show, The Place to Soar. You remember that, Caroline?
Yes.
You were a guest on my show.
Yes,
right?
I was. Yes, I was.
Yes. And so that came into fruition. And this whole thing with, the SOAR and redesigning your life and all of that. And then I did the coaching certification. And then once I did that, that kind of sealed the deal. And I pretty much knew at this point, okay, God is really calling you to do something different. You thought you were doing that. He's calling you to do something completely different. And when I look back over the course of my life, it's not really surprising that I do this kind of work. I didn't recognize that this is kind of what I was doing, but that was what I was doing in different instances. Things that I did in my church, for example. I was always doing a workshop or always working with the youth or just different things like that. And, mentoring people. I have friends of mine, and they always tell me, you are such a good mentor and you give me great advice. And so I was hearing both of these things for a very significant portion of my life, but I just didn't look at it in terms of that this would be my calling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I just looked at it like this is just something that I'm doing. I'm in my church. I'm doing ministry in my church. I'm, and all of that. And, things that I did on my job and all of that. It just all literally started to come together, and it came together and emerged as the place to soar and the SOAR Coaching Academy, and of course the place to SOAR TV. So even though all of those things sound like they're all kind of like different from one another, but they are all intimately connected.
Yes.
To what God has literally called me to do.
Yes, yes. Now, just for clarity's sake, can you explain to our listening audience what exactly is a life coach? Because maybe we don't know we need one.
Yes. So I want to start by saying what a life coach isn't.
Okay.
A life coach is not a mentor. A life coach is not an advisor. A life coach is not a therapist. A life coach is not a counselor. All of those different things that I mentioned play a specific kind of role with an individual. Mm-hmm. But being a life coach is a little bit different. And being a life coach, it's really about me helping an individual to begin to define who they are, what are those really, really great things about me, what are those things that I've experienced in my life, how do I see myself, do I appreciate myself, and am I kind of living in this space that I really want to be in. So you have a lot of people out there, quite frankly, who are in positions, working, but at the same time that they're working, they have this other thing in the back of their mind that's kind of nagging them. You could call it a dream, you could call it passion, all of those different things. You could call it purpose. And sometimes there's a huge mismatch between what a person is actually doing for a living, to generate, to support themselves, provide. But there's this other almost nagging thing that keeps saying, you should be thinking about doing this, or you should be thinking about doing that. And a lot of times people end up in this place where they feel like, I'm not living my best life.
Okay.
I'm not utilizing my gifts. I'm not utilizing my talents. I'm not utilizing my spiritual gifts in a way that is going to help me to get to the place in the life that I really want to live. So that's why I say, I kind of help people to dig through themselves and draw their attention inward to discover what is on the inside of them and help them to become that person that they are truly aspiring to be. Sometimes that's a short conversation. Sometimes that's a longer conversation. And that's why I kind of link what I do as a life coach to growth and development, to personal growth and development, because you cannot grow and you cannot develop if you don't intimately know yourself, number one, and if you're not willing to take that personal accountability and responsibility. So it's not about me giving you solutions. I'm in place A, but I want to be in place B. So I'm going to give you a strategy and I'm going to give you a solution. What I'm going to do is help you, is ask you a lot of questions. Life coaching is about asking a lot of questions. But those questions are intended to draw you inward. Okay. To really begin to explore what is going on in the inside of you. And are there things on the inside that may be hindering you? Perhaps the way that you view yourself. Perhaps it could be that self-talk. You know how we have that self-talk with one another? With ourselves. It could be those types of things. So it's all about, how do we sift through all of that to move those obstacles out of the way that may, in fact, be preventing you from moving forward. So, if you think about a therapist helps you to sort sort of understand your past and your traumas and, different things like that, that kind of explain where you are in your present. A life coach is more about where you are in your present. How do you get to where you want to be in your future?
Okay.
And you start doing that by examining what is on the inside.
Okay.
So I always make that very clear, especially when it comes to drawing that line and understanding that I am not a therapist or a counselor. So if I'm, as a matter of fact, I had this happen to me very recently where a young woman had reached out to me and, we did like this 30-minute, just a quick consultation and everything. And when she started to mention things like depression, or, things along those lines that really fall more into that mental health, that's immediately a red flag for me. So that may be telling me that I, as a life coach, may not be what that individual is looking for or what it is that they actually need at this point in time. So it's about partnering. I partner with my clients, walk them through some very thought-provoking and creative ways to engage themselves, inspire them to kind of maximize their personal, their professional potential, and all of that to kind of get to where it is they want to be in their lives.
Okay. I could say that would be one of your biggest challenges when you start to talk to somebody and then they start to go into an area that you don't have, the expertise in. So is that one of your biggest challenges?
Yes. It is a challenge. However, I'm actually a mental health a certified mental health first aid instructor. So I've been trained to kind of listen for certain things that people say that will give you an indication that there's something else underlying that might not necessarily. So that training actually helps me in terms of going through the coaching process, because I'm constantly aware of kind of where is that place that people are coming from. And when you look at, there's an organization called the International Coaching Federation,
yes,
and they have a core set of competencies that I follow. They have a code of ethics that I follow, and then they also have a set of guidelines for when you're starting to get to that place where you think you need to refer a client for therapy. So my whole thing is I want to be able to help an individual to really accomplish something powerful in their lives. But at the same time, I have to be very conscious of drawing that line in terms of what my role is versus what a therapist or a counselor's role might be. Because the bottom line is it's about the client. It's not about me, and it's not about me being, impressive, like I can do this for you. And it's not about any of that at all. Because if I cannot help you get from point A to point B or C or D through the coaching process, that says to me that there might be something else. And what I've also done is, because of the sort of that mental health first aid connection, I have certain people that I know who are therapists, who are counselors and all of that. So I sort of have this little network of individuals that I can use as referrals. So if I'm talking with someone like the young lady that I mentioned, and she uses the word depression or, something else along that line that kind of falls more in the mental health area, I have a group of mental health professionals that I can, if necessary, I can have that conversation that says, I don't think I'm the right person for you, but I have these incredible people over here that I think would be good for you to talk to. And then maybe she and I, or he and I, could come back to the coaching process once they've kind of gotten to the place that they need to be from the mental health perspective.
Okay, I get it. Are you accredited through ISCF?
Well, so the way it works is, if I do a certification program.
Mm-hmm.
It's the program or the organization or that is accredited through ICF.
Okay.
So I, as an individual, am not, but the services that I've gone through, they are accredited. And actually, the woman that had told me years ago, when she kind of called it out, and she thought I was actually a life coach, that's one of the things that she told me, that if I decide to go that route, any program that I decide to take a look at or consider, that's one of the things that I should be aware of, is that the ICF is kind of the golden standard. So if a program is accredited by them, then you know that's a good program.
Okay. So, what are your favorite self-help books? Because in order to be a life coach, I would assume that you yourself have gone through the same process that you would be taking your clients through. And it's about self-help. It's how we help ourselves too. So what are some of your self-help procedures that you took yourself through to get yourself to the place where you are?
Yes. And that's a really, really great question, because one of the rules of the game is you're a coach, but you need a coach. You need to be coached as well.
Well, all of us.
That is really, really, that's a great question. So I read all kinds of materials. And a lot of what I do in terms of most of the things that I'm currently reading are related to how do I get better at doing what it is in service to individuals. So one of the things that I sort of adopted when I was putting my program together, and what is that process that I'm going to use, is appreciative coaching. Now, people in your audience may have heard of appreciative inquiry, and I've got a little bit of experience in appreciative inquiry. It's a tool, it's a process that I've used in the past. Mm-hmm. But there's a group of women, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking out on the woman's name. I'm kind of blanking out on the name, but she and a group of other individuals got together, and they took a look at appreciative inquiry and said, this definitely applies to the coaching arena. And so they sort of took that concept, and there's a whole entire process involved with appreciative coaching. And essentially what appreciative is, the best way to kind of explain it is, if you're in a job situation, oftentimes whenever there are issues or there are problems or there are we're not meeting our production targets, we're not meeting our performance targets, generally what the process is that people will start to look at what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And start trying to come up with solutions and new procedures, change management, and all of that, because they're focused on, we have a problem, we need to find a solution. This isn't working, so we have to find a solution that's going to change that so that now will work. The appreciative approach is slightly different, because the appreciative approach, instead of having people focus on what's not working, the focus is on, well, what is working? And what are those things that represent those peak experiences? What are those things that represent what it looks like when we are, as a team, as an organization, when we are operating at that peak performance, when we are operating at that peak production? What does that look like? What are those things that we are doing that are certainly really, really working? Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of going from a problem-based approach to let's look at what is working and how do we develop those things that are working really well so that we can use those things to kind of create that performance or that production that we're looking for. So that's kind of how appreciative, that's kind of, if I'm making sense, That's kind of how appreciative inquiry works. So it was kind of like a shift away from the old way of kind of looking at how do you make improvements. You don't just make improvements by looking at what's wrong. You also make improvements by looking at what's right.
So it's the,
okay.
Okay, go ahead.
No. Do you have a question?
No, I was going to ask: is the goal then to get the individual to see what they do best, and then try to work on that?
Exactly. So let's take exactly what you just said, and let's look at it on the coaching side.
Okay.
So, for example, I can. This is not a client that I had myself, but this is one of the things that I liked about the book, Appreciative Coaching, is that they use a lot of case studies with their actual clients, and they walk you through the exact process that they used to get that client to the place where they wanted to be. So I'll give you an example of a woman who sought a client, and this was an individual who, I believe she worked in the real estate industry, and she was phenomenal in her work. The people loved her, her clients loved her, her co-workers loved her. She was fantastic at what she did for a living, right?
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, her personal life was in a shambles. Like, she was behind on her taxes. I think in the story it said she was like 3 years behind on her taxes, and just how she functioned in her personal space at home and everything was very different from the way that she functioned in her job.
Is that
right?
typical? That's not typical.
Pardon?
Though. That's not typical, right?
It can be. It just depends. It just completely depends. So I'm going to use depression as an example. So, then I'll come back to that individual. Even though, like I said, I'm not a mental health professional, but one of the things that depression can do to a person is, so if you're unable to kind of do your daily activities, and your relationships are suffering, and this is going on and that's going on, that's kind of how depression can look. But then I can speak from experience that when I dealt with depression, I was more of a high functioning depressive, and what that meant was I could go to work every day and I could do my job, and my job never suffered. But then when I got home, and I'm talking more specifically before I had my children, when I would get home, that's when I would feel the depression that was there. And so people would look at me and say, oh, you're great and you got this going on and all of that. But then underneath that, I was dealing with this depression in my personal life. And I'm not saying that this woman was dealing with depression in her personal life, but I think that's a way of showing how you could be on top of your game in your workspace, and then in your personal space, you're suffering. So in her case, it was how she organized her life that was really suffering. And like I said, one of the key things is not doing her taxes, and her attitude was a little bit different, because she kind of looked at, well, when I'm at work, I'm a professional. But when I'm at home, I'm more of a free spirit. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of a mismatch, because now she's seeking coaching so that she can kind of fix her personal life. And so one of the things that we do, at least with this approach that I use with the appreciative coaching, is kind of going through the process of kind of listening to the person, asking relevant questions and all of that, and helping that person get to a place where they can define what their specific coaching topic is going to be. And so with this particular individual, questions were asked, and, to help the coach help the client dig deeper and deeper to kind of identify what are some of the things that are going on and all of that. And what her coaching, what her coaching topic ended up being was, the coach challenged her to kind of look at her clients and talk about her clients why she does what she does when it comes to her clients, why she works as hard as she does when it comes to her clients. And so what her coaching topic ended up being was shift your mindset so that you begin to treat yourself as if you were one of your clients. So if you're working with yourself as if you're a client, that means all your stuff is going to be organized, your paperwork, all the things that you have to do to manage your life are going to be organized, because now instead of you just dealing with yourself as self, you're looking at yourself as if you were a client. And all that great work that you do on the client side, she was able to begin to transfer that over to the personal side.
So that worked.
And it worked.
Okay.
It worked. But again, it was a process. And in the appreciative coaching, there are a number of phases that you go through. The first one is the discovery phase. And that's where the client and the coach are really coming together, mainly for the purpose of understanding, for the coach to really, it's for building that relationship, number one. But it's also for the coach to start honing in on what are those things that you do really, really well. And that was part of the conversation with this woman. So when you're working with your clients, what do you like best about yourself? What do you like best about how you communicate with your clients? What do you like best about when you take a client in to see a new home? What do you like about yourself when you're interacting with your client in general? And so all of those things that you like and appreciate about yourself, how about if we start transferring that appreciation for those peak experiences into your personal life? So that's that discovery phase. And in that discovery phase is when you define what your coaching topic is going to be. So then you kind of continue around. There's the discovery phase, there's the design phase. There's 4 phases that you go through, and each one of those phases are very, very clearly defined as to what activities go on in those different phases. And ultimately, the goal is to get to a place where the transformation is beginning to happen. And it's a very cyclical kind of thing. So once you get to sort of that place, that destiny, and destiny is really about your dream, that way that you saw yourself in that dream actually becoming reality. And so you're kind of going through this process. You go through the discovery, and then you're kind of defining what you would like for your life to, that's what it is, defining, what you would like for your life to look at. And then once you've got that definition in place, now you start designing. And you can think of designing as sort of, what are some of those goals that I want to set? But it's not exactly the same thing as when you think of the, sort of when you're in the business world and you're setting a goal and you set strategies and all of that. It's all really, really focused on you trying to get to this place, this specific place that you want to be. And in the example that I'm giving, that specific place is, I want to think of myself as a client, and all of those things that I appreciate about who I am as a client, I want that to show up in my personal life. So it's like I said, there's this process, and when she kind of arrives in that place where she feels like, yes, I am now appreciating myself to the same extent that I appreciate my clients. That was her destiny, in the sense that was a place where she ultimately wanted to be. And so you just continue that growth process. So as I mentioned, the cycle can be iterative. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're with the coach every time you go through one of those cycles. Mm-hmm. But what it means is, once you go through that cycle the first time and you begin to master it in terms of what that looks like for you, and then you can repeat that for other aspects of your life.
Well, it sounds like you really enjoy doing the life coaching. And
I do.
It sounds, I can tell. But let's talk about you as an author.
Yes, because I like that too.
Yeah, I know you do. Actually, that's how I met you, at an author. Yes, we were both at an author. I don't even, what was it, like a book signing or some sort of?
Yeah, it was book signing, it was, remember, because it was the Talented 10, because she had 10 of us there as authors, and yeah, we were signing books, we were talking with one another and connecting, and all that good stuff. Yeah, that was a great time.
Yeah, I think she wanted us to connect and get together and you know, get to know each other, which I'm glad she did, because that's how I met you. But you have a new book out right now, right? You want to talk about your book?
Yeah, so I've got multiple books that are out there, and I started off my authorship actually as a person who participates in anthologies, so I have a number of anthologies on the market. But one of the things that I always say is the anthologies I wrote, but the book that I'm getting ready to talk about, I birthed that book.
Okay.
Because that book is my life. That book is Anita, going all the way back to myself as a child, a very young child. The name of the book is I Want to See Laney's House. And even when you look at the cover of that book, on the cover of the book, there's a picture of me as a 5-year-old little girl. There's a picture of my sister as a 3-year-old little girl. There's a picture of my mom on the cover as well. And then there's a picture of the house that we used to live in when my sister and I were at that age. And that cover sort of sets the entire tone for what the book is all about. If I had to just give like a quick synopsis, the book is really about a spiritual journey, and it's about a mental wellness journey, and me going from a broken little girl to how I like to define myself today as a liberated woman. And there's lots of things, lots of milestone things that happened to me along the way. And many of those milestone things are directly related to God and how God literally showed up in my life. Mm-hmm. So, tragic. My sister had I lost my sister at those ages that I just spoke about. I was 5, she was 3, and she was killed. And I saw the whole thing, and it put me in a place. It put me in a place of depression. So I talked earlier about my experience with depression.
Right.
But it put me in a place of depression as a 5-year-old little girl. And being in that place, I was too young to express what I was feeling. I didn't have the language because I was just a little kid.
Right.
So I couldn't even express the pain that I was in. It was just there. I just couldn't fathom what was happening. And in my mind, like I woke up one day, and then that same day, when I went to bed, my sister was nowhere to be found. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't understand where she is. That was a really, really tough thing for me to kind of manage in my life and everything. But God showed up for me in a very powerful way. And when he showed up, he let me know 2 things. Number 1, he let me know, and he showed up for me at my sister's funeral, right? So between the day that my sister died and my sister's funeral, for me, everything is black. Like I have this sensation, the day of the accident, I had this sensation that I was falling down this spiral staircase, and I got to the bottom of the staircase, and I was just in a place of blackness. I mean, I was just completely in a place of blackness. So for me, knowing what I know now as an adult, that was that very dark space of depression that I was in at that time. And so depression sort of took on this, it became like this, a spiral staircase became like an allegory for depression for me throughout the course of my life, right? But God showed up 4 or 5 days later when we had the funeral. And I was still in that place, but on the day of my funeral, of her funeral, God brought me out of that place, and he brought me out of that place by helping me to see that my sister was okay. He helped me to see that my sister was in his presence, and that she is now okay. And he also spoke into my spirit and said, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you.
Okay.
And the crazy thing is, as a 5-year-old, I knew nothing about scripture. I knew nothing about Jesus, really, other than, maybe the stories that I heard about in Sunday school, because we did go to Sunday school, but we went to Sunday school and that was basically it. You know what I'm saying? So God literally showed up, and he showed me who he was through his love. So a lot of times I tell people, when you go through life and you get saved, and you generally, most of us, not all of us, most of us get saved when we're kind of older, and, we start to kind of put things together and all of that. And you're, starting to get to know God and learning scripture and, verses and all of that. You're understanding the scope of the Bible. I didn't have any of that. I came to God based 100% on that experience of me, of God showing up at my sister's funeral. And so that built a foundation for me that carried throughout the course of my life. And that depression turned into grief, or the grief turned into depression, like full-blown depression, but I was just a little kid. So the way that showed up for me when I was very young is that I became very quiet. And even now when people, because I've relocated back to Pittsburgh, so now I spend a lot more time around people that I grew up with. And I lived in a town where, the kids that were in kindergarten together are the same kids that graduated from high school together. And we spent all of those years just kind of growing together. And oftentimes people say, oh, yeah, you were all, two things that they usually say about me. You were really, really smart, and you were quiet. I mean, even some of my old teachers, I ran into a teacher, and he said the same thing. You were always very quiet and all of that. But what people didn't know, and what I didn't even understand myself, is that quietness is because I kind of drew myself inward, because I had this depression that I was dealing with, and I had this grief. Like, the grief was pretty much overwhelming at times, and I didn't really talk a lot to people. Sometimes it was very difficult for me to kind of connect to people. Like, I remember my mom, when we moved to the town that I grew up in, and she put me in the community center. It was myself and my brother. I had a brother, but my brother was a baby at the time of the accident. And she put me in a community center, and I did not like being there. I just didn't like, because there were only certain people that I would connect to. And when I connected to those people, those were the people that I would open up, that I would more likely to open up to. I mean, all of this started to change as I got older and, older, but I had to also pass through those adolescent years and those teenage years, and we had difficulties in my home. I experienced domestic violence as a little kid. So there was, molestation. There were just these different things that happened to me when I was very, very young. So by the time I got to be a teen, I was just kind of really messed up on the inside. And I had, oftentimes I would have thoughts of suicide. I did the cutting and all of that. But, Caroline, the thing that saved my life, honestly, the thing that saved my life is the fact that every time I was in that bathroom and I had that knife, guess what came into my mind?
What?
What came into my mind was images of me and my sister playing in those happy days before she was gone. And that would always pull me back. And I could put the knife down. And it literally would pull me back. And it was almost, sometimes it felt like it wasn't even something that I was just seeing in my mind. Like, I was literally having a vision of my sister and I playing together. And that would always bring me out of that space. And then I could kind of get on. And, all of that started to change And then I had like other things that were going on. So all of this along the way, God is developing me spiritually. But that's not to say that I always did everything right. You know how we are. We make wrong decisions and all of that. But I always knew that God was just there. Mm-hmm. He was just there. And so that was always very amazing. Things changed for me dramatically when I got to college. The cutting was gone. I didn't have the suicidal thoughts as much, but there was still the grief, and I still dealt to a certain extent with the depression. But it no longer manifested itself in suicidal thoughts, and it didn't manifest itself anymore in terms of the cutting and all of that. But there were still other things. You know, I grew up not really knowing my father, and I always struggled with the fact that I didn't know my father. And I was one of those people that if I had been adopted, I would have been the person like scouring through records and research because I need to find my birth mother. Mm-hmm. That would have been me. Because that's how I felt about my father. I didn't know a lot about my father, but then all of that changed in my freshman year when I got to know my grandmother.
Okay.
And when I got to know my grandmother, this is my grandmother on the paternal side of my family. And what was interesting is that my grandmother, when she had heard, because there was a disconnect between my mother and that side of my family, so that's how I never really interacted much with them as I was growing up. And but when my sister got killed, my grandmother thought it was me. And so for a long time, she thought it was me that had happened to. But then once I got connected to her in freshman year, it opened up a whole other level of who Anita is. And so what I said earlier about this being a spiritual journey, but it was also a mental wellness journey, because the book is divided into 5 chapters. The first chapter is Little Girl. The second chapter is Awakening Adolescent. The third chapter is Nurturing Young Adult. And then Evolution of a Grown Woman. And then Yearnings of a Liberated Woman. And so each one of those chapters represents this progression, this steady progression along the course of my life to get to a much better place. So, I met my grandmother, all of that. I had children. I had 2 daughters. When my children were small, I'm in my 40s now. When my children were small, we lived in Trenton, New Jersey. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, but I left Pittsburgh in 1988 after I went to college and all of that, worked for a while, and then I left Pittsburgh, which is how I ended up in New Jersey, right? So I lived in New Jersey. I had my first daughter already. My second daughter was born in New Jersey. We were living in Trenton. And I was outside. We lived on a really nice street in the Trenton area. And it was one of those kind of streets where kids could play outside and they could play in the street. And then they just kind of move out of the way when the cars come, because most of the people that came on our street were people that actually lived there, or they were visiting. So it was one of those and it was a dead-end street. So it was kind of one of those tucked-away streets. So kids could play out in front of the houses. The jump rope and all of that in the street. And so my kids were out there one day playing with some other neighborhood children. And Caroline, I got this vision. As I'm watching my children, I got a vision of myself and my sister when we were little, because we were outside. We were playing in the front of our house when the accident happened, right? Right. And I'm standing there and I'm looking. I know that those are my children right there, but what I'm seeing, so it's like what I'm seeing in the present, but then my mind's eye from the past was allowing me to see my sister. And so I was literally seeing myself and my sister through my 2 daughters as I'm watching them and they're playing. And Caroline, like a bolt of lightning, it just hit me.
So that was your inspiration for writing the book?
It was your fault.
What?
Pardon?
I was thinking that was your inspiration for writing the book.
That was part of it.
Okay.
That was part of it. But I didn't really start working on the book until after I started thinking about the book. Like around the time when I was coming out of corporate America.
Okay.
But I started writing the book after, like in 2014 going into, it was like late 2014 going into 2015. And I started actually writing the book after my first, after I did the first anthology. But the thing so this was, that was a milestone piece for me when I had that vision, because what clicked inside of me was that you've been carrying all this guilt around. Now look at your children out there. There's no way that you could have stopped the accident. You were 5 years old. There's no way you could have prevented the accident. It was not your fault. And so all of that guilt and everything, I was able to look at that guilt and look at that grief that I was carrying around in my body and look at that depression that I was carrying around in my body. And I was able to come to the realization that I needed counseling, because I needed to face all of that. And my making that step to face all of that, I got the counseling. That was the very first step towards me even being able to think about writing the book, because that was the first time I ever talked about that day and that accident. Like, people who knew me knew that I had a sister when I was very young, but they didn't know the details, because I would never talk about it. And I would never talk about that thing of how God showed up at the funeral, because it was a point in my life where I just thought, if you go around telling people that, what you experienced, that people are going to just think you're crazy. So I never talked about it. I couldn't understand it. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't until I got older and I began to understand a little bit more about how God works and some of the ways that He will interact with people. And one of the ways that He interacts with me sometimes is through these visions. But I didn't know that as a 5-year-old,
But did you get an opportunity to talk to your mom about how you were feeling?
I did. Oh my God, that's another really, really great question. So I started working on the book. I'm working on it. I had some stops and starts. Just had some moments where I just wasn't able to think my way through, whether structuring or whatever. But then in 2017 is when I had set a goal for myself, actually in 2016, roughly in that time period, that I was going to have the book done in 2017, right? I was just like, you've been working on this book forever, and you need to just, you just need to get it together. So I was looking at it from the standpoint that I was just procrastinating. And then I was letting my emotions get in the way, and all of that, and that's why I wasn't able to kind of pull it all together and all of that. But then in 2017 is when my mom became very ill. Actually, my mom was diagnosed as stage 4 metastasized breast cancer in 2014, a year after I came out of corporate America. But my mom didn't tell us that. Myself, and I have 2 brothers, my mom didn't tell us that she had that diagnosis. Like, we knew my mother originally had breast cancer in the 80s, but she beat it. But it turns out that there's a particular gene that can be, somehow it can go dormant. Like, you can, she beat the cancer, but because it was associated with this particular gene, I forgot the name of the gene. HER2, maybe. I'm not absolutely sure. But because she had that particular gene, and that particular gene, it can lie dormant for years. And then when it comes out of that dormancy, it basically comes out with a vengeance, and it just really starts to spread. And so she had gone through chemotherapy and all of this. We didn't know that was everything that was going on. Like, one of the things that she had to have is because the cancer invaded her mostly in her abdominal area, and she had to have a hysterectomy, and she told us that she had to have a hysterectomy, but she didn't tell us it was because of the cancer.
Right.
So, we knew that, she had these things, and my mom, had always had stomach ulcers and just different things like that. And so it just wasn't on my radar screen. It wasn't on our radar screen that she was that ill. So then in 2017 is when we realized that there was some, that she's really getting ill here. And so I came home to Pittsburgh around July. No, I was here initially a little bit earlier than that. I want to say like maybe June. My grandson and I came. We spent some time with my mom, and that was when I began to see that there's something else going on here. And so, I took my grandson back and, finished up some business in New Jersey, and then I just came back to Pittsburgh. And when I came back to Pittsburgh, that's when, and my brother came from California, and we were all here, and we're just trying to make heads or tails, like, what is going on here? What is going on with our mother? Now, the guy that was like the head of her medical team, he's the main one that we were talking to, and he assumed that we knew what that diagnosis was. And so, there were, like, that very first conversation we had with him, we all had these very perplexed looks on our faces, because we're like, what are you talking about? He was describing this and describing that, and we were just like, what are you talking about? And then that's when he told us that, what her diagnosis was back in 2013. Back in 2014. So what I didn't realize is that when we came, my mother was in end of life. We just didn't know that. We just didn't understand that was what was going on. And, once, we started, we were here, and we're interacting with our mother, and our mother started talking to us about things that she had never talked about. And my mother essentially told us that God was calling her home. We just couldn't hear that that's what she was saying. If you can understand what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't say it in exactly those words, but she knew within herself that, because she was saying things like, I've made my peace with God, and then she started sharing stuff with us. Like, we would sit there sometimes just for an hour, a couple of hours, and we taped on our phone. We recorded everything. And one of the things that my mother said in one of those conversations, if you remember I think it's in the book of Matthew, when Jesus is talking about, I've gone to prepare a place, and where I'm going, there's many mansions and all of that. Mm-hmm. My mother said something that did two things for me. Number one, it made me think of that scripture. And number one, she called out the title of my book. Up until that point, I was writing, but I didn't have the title. I wasn't quite sure what the title was going, and I was just going back and forth. Yeah. But what my mother said was, and this was in that conversation when she was saying how she's made peace with God. I've made my peace with God. And then she started calling out different people that had already gone home, that were already, passed on. And the first thing she said was, I want to see Laney's house. That is exactly what she said. I want to see Laney's house. And then she talked about, I want to see Daddy's house, and I want to see Maxine. And she was just calling out all these people, these family members who had gone on before her. But as soon as she said, I want to see Laney's house, I knew that was the title of the book.
Now, is that your sister's name?
Pardon?
Is that your sister's name, Laney?
Laney, exactly.
Okay.
That was her. That's her name. And like I said, one of the other things in that whole Laney conversation, if you will, is that my mother and I, you have to understand, my mother and I never talked about my sister's death.
Okay.
And I mean that. We never talked about my sister's death, but we talked about it that day. And she talked about what that day looked like for her.
Mm-hmm.
And number one, the things that she said validated all of my memories. I mean, she completely validated my memories. Even the memories of the house, how the house was set up with the living room, and then you go in the next room, and there was these steps. You go up, and there was like the kitchen was on a higher level. That was exactly how I saw it, and that's exactly how my mother described it. And she would say things to me like, yeah, you remember remember there were those steps, and everything that she said, I could fully and completely remember all of that, which was really gratifying for me because that validated, and that meant that a lot of stuff that I had already written in the book, she validated, at least from that standpoint in terms of the accident and all that sort of thing, that my mother really validated a lot of that for me. And then, like I said, she proceeded to explain what that day looked like for her, and in her explaining that, it helped me to get a better handle on my mother and the grief that she carried in her body. And her grief was much more related to the fact that she had a premonition that somebody was going to die that day. And when she said that, it totally and completely blew me away. And she was very upset when she was saying it. So this wasn't something that she was, she wasn't just making this up. And that she, had this sense that something tragic was going to happen. She had no idea who or anything like that, but it was just something in her spirit. And her guilt lay in the fact that in her mind, all I had to do was tell the kids to come in the house. Like she kept saying that over and over as she was sharing this, this memory, and she kept saying, Anita, all I had to do was tell y'all to come in the house, and I didn't do it. I ignored the feeling, and I didn't. And she said, I'm the one that carried the guilt all of these years because I could have. Now this is how she saw it. I could have prevented that accident. So, as you can imagine, at this point, we're like in the my mom was in the nursing home at this point, and we were all, my brother and I were like sitting on the side of her bed, and we're all just weeping as we are receiving all of this stuff and everything. So those were some very powerful moments, and I think in those moments it kind of brought me and my mom to a place of peace. It kind of brought both of us to a place of peace and all of that. So then, after that, we just kind of went through, and I did lose my mom on September the 13th. Is when I lost her, and but after that is when I was really able to get, because now I had more clarity, and I got words from my mom that I could include in the book. So when I was calling myself, when I was like bashing myself and telling myself, oh, you're just procrastinating, you need to focus on writing this book, God knew. He knew that there were some other things that needed to be included in the book. And had I finished that book in 2017, because my goal at that time was to have it done by my birthday, which is in April. Had I finished that, half of the last chapter in that book wouldn't even exist, because so much of it is connected to that experience with losing my mom.
Wow.
And her, us being able to talk about what that day actually looked like for us, and, her sharing what it looked like for her, and just different things like that. Like, the story would have really been incomplete. And so God, in His infinite wisdom, there were things that, like I'm going along and, oh yeah, I got to get this done. Oh wait, I'm supposed to be writing. And so, but again, I was just beating myself up because I just thought I was just procrastinating. But it wasn't really procrastination at all. Because once I got through that experience, I was really able to write. So it still took me about a year from that point, it still took, because after my mom passed, and now I had to go through that state. I was in a state of just feeling lost. And, like the night when I came home and we were in my mom's house, I was just lost. I can't even describe it any other kind of way. I was lost, and probably I was in that state through, like for months after that. And then, but I started writing. I did start writing, and then almost the last day in 2018 is when I finally submitted the manuscript, and it was such a glorious day that I finally finished that. So if you recall, in the beginning of this conversation, I talked about the anthologies that I've done, and I said that those are books that I had written.
Right.
But this book I gave birth to.
Yes.
And the seed for this book was planted all the way back when I was just a 5-year-old kid. That's why it's about spiritual growth. It's my journey of spiritual growth, but it's also my journey towards mental wellness, because I feel so liberated now. And I mean, look, I can talk about this stuff. I'm not weeping. You know what I mean? So I do. Really, so that's a mental wellness milestone for me, was finishing that book.
So tell us, how could we purchase the book?
Well, the best way to purchase the book is to go to my website, because I actually have, if you just go to theplacetosoar.com, that's kind of my hub. And then from there, you can link over to author blog. And that when you click on that author blog link, it takes you directly to my blog, where I talk about the book and all the other books, and you can order the book under, because the reason I tell people to do that is because I have books myself that people can order the book directly from me. And one of the main reasons I like when people do that is because I can sign the book, and I like being able to sign the book for people, because that book has so much meaning for me, and when I sign it for them, it gives them a different sense of meaning as well. So the book can definitely be purchased through my website. I want to see, theplacetosoar.com. But I also have iwannaseelaineyshouse.com. You can go there as well. So, And then also it's available on Amazon. But like I said, the disadvantage of ordering it from Amazon or anywhere else online is that you can't get a signed copy of the book, and I just like being able to do that for people.
I get it. Now, do you have anything upcoming as we get to the end of this podcast? Because we've already reached our hour. But do you have anything upcoming? Any book signings coming up? Any appearances coming up? Anything that you want to share with us real quick about?
Actually, at this point, I don't. But for the past couple of weeks, I have been traveling, and I actually had the opportunity to. I recently became a member of an organization called ASALA, and it's the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And once I got connected to them, they invited me in to do a talk at the Pittsburgh branch here. But then I also got to go to their, I think it was their 104th anniversary, their 104th annual conference in Charleston, South Carolina, and that was such a treat for me. That was in the beginning. It was earlier this month that I was able to go, and I was featured as one of the. They had a author book signing, and I was one of the authors that was featured there. So that was such a high point for me. It's an amazing organization, and the fact that I was there, that was a high point for me.
Okay.
So I just came back from doing some stuff, and right now I don't have anything in the immediate future, but I certainly will and can let you know whenever I do. And the Coaching Academy is there. People can kind of go on there, get a little bit more information about some of the things that I talked about earlier with my coaching practice.
Yes, absolutely.
And if they just want to get to know me, Anita Russell, the place to soar is definitely, theplaceofsoar.com is definitely the place to go.
Okay.
So,
and I will share all that information on the page as well. But Anita, I want to just really personally thank you for really being so deep and so honest with your conversation. And I'm sure that what you had to say is going to help a lot of people who may have been experiencing something similar, or sometimes you think that you're the only person who is going through certain things, and you find out that you're not. Like your experiences with God when you were younger, I have a similar experience. It's not exactly, like yours, but there's a lot of individuals who I do believe will be able to benefit from what you said. Now, as a life coach, how can they reach you as well? The same information that you gave me?
Yeah, theplaceofsoar.com, because I've set up theplaceofsoar.com sort of as my hub.
Okay.
And any other website that I have, you can get to them from theplaceofsoar.com. If I could just make one more, just a final comment.
Absolutely.
It's kind of connected to some of the things that you just said. What I've learned in this experience is that even from a broader perspective, I think we're kind of in a place now from a humanity perspective, where telling your story is so important, because your story becomes, it's like your story enables you to be a witness to so many different things. And I think we're also in a place where we need truth.
Yes.
We need truth. And when people get to that point where they're able to tell their story as a witness to the truth, that's powerful.
Yes, I agree.
That's very powerful. And so that's just kind of the last thing that I wanted to leave with your audience is, tell your story, tell your truth. Tell your truth.
Yes, because you never know how that truth is going to help someone. You never know.
Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
Okay, well, again, this is Dr. Caroline Bethea-Jones, and you have been listening to Anita Russell. She's my guest for this evening. And I'll be back with you again for another episode.